Alright, hello. This is my video for part one of gastrointestinal physiology. I decided to split it into two parts just so that I can get the ball rolling while we're still learning the last little bits, and then maybe this way the watch time overall will be a little shorter. So I decided that I would just get the vocab terms out of the way in my big old sketchbook because there were so many, not sketchbook, notebook. Um, and that then I would just go over like the basic pieces and parts and locations and functions of the monogastric GI tract. So to begin with, we have bolus, which is just a rounded, chewed up mass of food that's been formed and has is well, when it's in like the oral cavity, it's being, it's getting ready to be swallowed, and then as a bolus, it travels down to the stomach through the esophagus as a bolus. Um, Next, we have the cephalic phase, which is the stage of the digestive process where it's basically all part of the head. It's happening whether food's entering the mouth, whether you're smelling food or just thinking about food. Um, it will cause an increase in the production of saliva, gastric juices, and pancreatic secretions. And this is just basically preparing the GI tract for the possible incoming food. Um, Chemical digestion is the type of digestion that takes place after the mechanical digestion. And the mechanical digestion is the physical separation of larger pieces of food into smaller pieces to increase surface area. But the physical digestion just takes it a step further. It actually uses enzymes and chemicals to break down this fine, chewed up food into like simple monomers that are easily absorbed by the body. Chief cells are a type of cell that's found in the stomach, and they produce pepsinogen, a like precursor or inactive form of pepsin, which I'll talk about later. Um, Chyme is a type of like liquid slurry that's just basically digested food and the gastric juice all mixed up together. It's usually white in color. It's very acidic because of the um, hydrochloric acid that is found in the stomach. Um, clo- hmm, I'm not going to say this word right. Cholecytokinin is a hormone produced by the endocrine cell by an endocrine cell known as CCK cell, and this is found in the duodenum, which is the first section of the small intestine. It stimulates the production of pancreatic juice, contracts gallbladder wall, and slows down the release of chyme into the duodenum. Enzyme is just a protein molecule that acts as a catalyst to speed up chemical reactions. The esophageal phase is the food entering the esophagus after being swallowed, and it creates a rhythmic wave of smooth muscle contractions called peristalsis to move that food bolus down into the stomach. Um, the muscle layers that are involved with this wave contraction is the inner circular layer, which when it contracts the organ, the esophagus, constricts and elongates, and then the outer longitudinal layer that when it contracts, the organ dilates and shortens. So I drew this little picture back when we were talking about it in anatomy. So it's our little food bolus. So this is our um, longitudinal layer, that's going in, and then this is the um, inner circular layer that's elongating. So it's just pinches in, pushes down, pinches after that, after it got moved down, goes down, just keeping it going down. Next, we have a G cell, which is a type of endocrine cell that is found in the stomach. It secretes gastrin, and gastrin is a hormone that increases the secretion of parietal and chief cells, especially the parietal, and induces the stomach muscle of the stomach wall to contract. Gastric juice. This is basically just like the soupy mixture found in a stomach. It's made up of mucus, hydrochloric acid, and pepsin, or pepsinogen, I should say. Um, Gastric motility is the movement of the stomach muscles caused by the digestive process. The gastric phase is um, food that has been taken in has now reached the stomach, and this stimulates both chemoreceptors and stretch receptors, and they both send a signal along the vagus nerve um, to the brain to increase gastric secretions and start peristaltic contractions. Next, we have goblet cells slash mucus cells. They're one and the same. They produce mucus, and this mucus protects the GI epithelium, because it's very, acidic in the stomach, and so this protects the stomach lining from getting ulcerations from the hydrochloric acid. And it also, in the small intestine, traps food particles so enzymes can, it keeps the food in place so that the enzymes can stick to it and break it down so that it can then be absorbed. The intestinal phase, this is once the food has moved from the stomach, it's become chyme, and is now the chyme has entered the small intestine. It's similar to the gastric phase where these stretch and chemoreceptors, are stimulated and send a signal to the vagus nerve, um, to increase the secretions and peristaltic contractions. But they also add that, like, some added effects is they release the release of some hormones due to the drop of in pH, and this inhibits stomach emptying and secretions. Mastication is just simply chewing. Um, Lysozymes is a type of enzyme that's found in ruminants, which are animals with four-chambered stomachs, like our cows, sheep, and goats. This enzyme um, breaks down bacteria, like the bacterial wall, so that it can be absorbed by the animal, and it's like a source of protein for them, since most of their diet is mainly just like greens, so this is like a way to get some protein in them. Galactose is just a simple sugar. It's a monosaccharide. It has a similar chemical makeup to glucose, just arranged a little differently. Microvilli are finger-like projections that stick out from the villi, and the villi are folds in the lumen, and both are, to increase surface area. But the microvilli are specialized epithelial cells, and because they're adding even more surface area by being on the villi, there's more absorption that can happen, which is important, to make sure that you're getting everything that you need and want. Monoglycerides are one fatty acid chains, and they are broken down from triglycerides. Monosaccharides are a one sugar molecule, like our galactose and glucose, and they are broken down from polysaccharides. Mucin or mucin are glycoprotein parts of mucus. They're secreted by saliva and epithelial cells. Mucosa is the membrane that lines various cavities in the body. So, like, in that regard, like, think of like body openings, like our nasal passages, our ears, eyes, urethra, vagina, anus. And it also covers the surface of internal organs. They are made up of one or more layers of epithelial cells and an overlaying layer of loose connective tissue. The oral phase is just the food being in the mouth and chewed and tasted and formed into that bolus by, like, the tongue. Um, And this is basically, where that cephalic phase would be going on, because it's sensing that there's food in the mouth, it's tasting and smelling the food. Parietal cells are um, cells found in the stomach that produce that hydrochloric acid. Um, the hydrochloric acid in the stomach, it reacts with the pepsinogen that was released by those oh man, I already forget what the chief cells. Um, and those two react to make pepsin, and pepsin is what breaks down protein from um, into like more manageable chunks. Excuse me. Yeah, it breaks down proteins into polypeptides, and then from there, I think. Oh, excuse me. What's it called? Trypsinogen. Yeah. Trypsinogen would be the enzyme that would break down those polypeptides into like mono or dipeptides. The parotid gland is the major salivary gland. Can't speak. And it secretes serosus saliva and serosa are smooth tissue membrane consisting of two layers of mesothelium that covers organs and viscera. Um, it's also called the visceral membrane, produces serosus fluid, which is produced by serosus cells, and I think the serosus fluid is just, I don't know, I didn't really see much, so maybe in class, maybe we still haven't gone over it that much yet. It just seems like it's part of saliva, or at least a mucousy kind of secretion. Um, the pharyngeal phase is. Oops, sorry. Hold on. Okay. Um, the pharyngeal phase is the involuntary closure of the larynx and epiglottis and vocal cord. Sorry, I was talking too fast. Let me try again. The pharyngeal phase is the involuntary closure of the larynx by the epiglottis and vocal cords. It is there's a temporary inhibition of breathing, and it prevents food from going down into the trachea. Reabsorption is just simply the act of absorbing something again. Um, Saliva, secreted by salivary glands. It's a watery liquid. It provides lubrication, uh, way of like forming and binding the food together. Some digestion can even take place here, like salivary amylase. Amylase breaks down starch, so um, there's while chewing is happening, that saliva can already start breaking down some of the starch even before it hits the stomach, and also it helps rehydrate our food so that it's it tastes better and it's easier to get going down. Secretin, excuse me. Secretin is secreted by the endocrine cell known as the S cell. It's a hormone produced in the duodenum, and it stimulates the secretion of pancreatic juice. And pancreatic juice is just basically bicarbonate, like an alkaline substance, and it's there for um, the neutralization of the acidic kind, because our small intestines are a more alkaline environment, and they don't really like the acidity of the stomach. They can't handle it, so that helps like kind of buffer it. Fructose is a monosaccharide from a plant, and that about does our vocab. All right, so let's get into our pieces and parts. Let me pause and get my stuff together. All right, so our first pieces and part of our digestive system of our monogastric animals would be stuff that has to do with our head and mouth. So we have our teeth, which are, depending on the type of animal, used just in general, is just used for the breakdown of whatever food is being ingested. Like, um, what's the word? Carnivores, they have, scissor-like teeth for ripping and tearing, while, our herbivores have more flat, grindy teeth. But, basically this is just to increase the surface area. We have a tongue, which is found at, the floor of our mouth. And this is a skeletal muscle. We can control it. It's responsible for tasting and helping to form that food bolus that will eventually be swallowed. And in some animals, like a cow, it actually is how they take in the food, like it's how they grab it. It's prehensile. And it's also an important spot for getting a pulse or taking blood samples. If you can't reach anywhere else on the animal, depending on what's going on, that can be a site that you can use. Along like the jaw and temporal areas and underneath the tongue, we have salivary glands, which provide, like I said before, lubrication and binding, partial digestion of starches, and just the rehydration of food. And so then once the food is starting to get swallowed, we have that, pharyngeal phase where the what are the words? I'm so sorry. So the larynx and the larynx closes thanks to the epiglottis, so that food doesn't go down our trachea. And then we swallow, and then our esophagus is found from our, larynx area to our stomach, so just the whole, way down. It's made of those two smooth muscles I mentioned earlier, to form that rhythmic, smooth muscle contraction of the peristalsis. Let's see. Okay, so now we have the stomach, and let's see, I drew a picture of it. Where is it? Hold on, gotta find it. I drew it in the anatomy notebook. Hold on. Alright, so in a monogastric stomach, we have just that J-shaped, and it lies on the left side and is in the cranial aspect of the abdomen. Oh, speaking of anatomy notebook, I drew the left view of a dog, I think that's what the picture was. Yeah, so we have a lot of stuff going on our left side. So we got our liver, got our stomach, spleen, small intestine, our descending colon, not part of, gastric, but we have our bladder here too. But we'll get into the other little parts later. But now we're talking about the stomach. So we have, let me get the picture back out. So we have this J shape. This top is the esophagus. What's also worth noting is in monogastric animals, there's two sphincters associated with the esophagus. We have the upper esophageal sphincter, or also known as the was it crick? How do you say that? Crick. Do I even have it written down? It's like crick. cricropharyngeal sphincter? Question mark. I know it starts with like the crick part. I'm so sorry. And then we have the lower esophageal sphincter or the cardiac sphincter. Um, the lower esophageal sphincter is the one that we talk a little bit more about. It's the one that it controls the amount of food that gets put into the stomach. This first top part of the stomach is the fundus. The big part's the body, and then that little end towards the duodenum is the pylorus. The stomach is all glandular. Um, it um, da, da, da. Yeah, okay, so it's glandular, so the whole thing is producing its gastric juice, and that gastric juice is, as I said earlier, mucus, hydrochloric acid, and pepsinogen. Um, and then the mucus is from the mucus cells / goblet cells, hydrochloric acids from the parietal cells, and then pepsinogens from those chief cells. Um, so, there's the stomach also has some rugal folds, which helps with surface area and contains those cells and just helps with that grinding motion when it contracts. Um, the stomach also has a sphincter at the end near the duodenum called the pyloric sphincter, and that controls. Sorry, excuse me, I'm gasping. um, that controls the amount of like chyme that is released at a time. So the very small fine pieces will be able to move on through, but the bigger pieces get slammed and then churned back, and that helps break that down. Um, let's see. Oh, maybe worth to mention fundus is just like a storage. Um, it has adaptive relaxation, which if you eat a lot, it'll stretch and accommodate over time. Um, Another role of hydrochloric acid I didn't mention earlier. It protects the body by killing most of the bacteria, and it also breaks down peptide bonds in fat. Um, on top of it, also, reacting with the pepsinogen so that the pepsinogen can work on those proteins. Um, let's see. Oh, we also have the hormone gastrin that's secreted in the stomach, and that was the hormone that increases the secretion of the parietal cells and chief cells, and tells the stomach to contract. So when there's food in your stomach, it it tells the stomach by the chemoreceptors and stretch receptors, being, oh hey, there's something here, and telling the vagus nerve that that's going on, and then it increases the secretions, and then this just helps increase the hydrochloric acid and the pepsinogen even more to increase the digestion of the fats and proteins. So let's see. All right, next structure we have the small intestine. It's just a long tubular organ. I don't think I have just a specific picture of it. But like the duodenum's like just this big part here it's that first part of it. The longest part, the jejunum, that's where much of the absorption takes place, because there's still some digestion that takes place in the duodenum. That's primarily what happens there, only a little bit of absorption. And the ileum, there's also some absorption, but that's where it's kind of completed, and that's the last part. There's no like real way to distinguish them. It's just the most cranial portion is the duodenum, the most um, caudal portion is the ileum, and then the whole middle part is the jejunum. Um, let's see. The small intestine has those villi, microvilli we talked about with our, surface area and breakdown of enzymes and absorption of those enzymes. Um, just making sure I'm not missing anything as I'm going along here. Oh, so once like Charlotte, stop. Sorry, my dog was bothering me. um, once the chyme has reached the duodenum, there's different triggers that happen. So basically, the chemoreceptors and stretch receptors in the small intestine talk to the vagus nerve, and there's an increase of secretions and such. Like also the peristaltic contractions like in the small intestine, but it tells the stomach to decrease in those um to decrease in the secretion of the gastric juice, to decrease the amount that's being released into the small intestine and all that jazz. This is where the secretin in the cholecytokinin is released. Um, Around the same time too, like with the chyme entering, should also talk about the pancreas and the gallbladder and the liver. The liver, as far as um, GI, digestion stuff goes, excuse me, it plays the role in making bile, and bile is what is used to help break down fat. It acts as a detergent, and it separates the fat into easier to handle like droplets. Creates like a mishell, I think that's how you say it, or miscal. So these triglycerides are now water soluble, so that the lipase that actually breaks down and the chains can get to it easier because it's not easy from like in just a big fat conglomerate to get to it, so it helps do that. The gallbladder is where the bile from the liver is stored, and so that close cholecytokinin, um, if you recall from my vocab, it stimulates the contraction of that gallbladder, which when it contracts, it releases bile into the duodenum to help with that, because no digestion of fat has really been done yet, except for a little bit by the hydrochloric acid in the stomach. So this is where it starts. The pancreas, as I said earlier, its pancreatic juice has the bicarbonate, and it also releases amylase, trypsinogen, and lipase. Amylase is carb digestion, or that starch. Trypsinogen is the protein digestion, and then the lipase is the fat digestion. Excuse me. So it's not only buffering the acidity; it's also beginning that digestive process. Let's see. So like I said, I'll get into specifics about the nutrients in food in that one last point once we've gone over monogastric, and I can just, wrap it all in there. Um, so I'll skip those details for now. I'm just going over those major structures and functions. So once we leave the ileum, um, we have this little outpouching, not well, kind of, depending on the animal, I think. It's just a blind pocket. It's the junction of the small and large intestine. It's called the cecum. I can't remember if I said that yet. Um, Depending on the animal, like in our monogastrics, which is what I'm trying to focus on, I keep trying to add in ruminants and hindgut fermenters. But in our monogastric animals, the cecum's not really, there's not like a major important role. Like there's speculation that, it holds on to some bacteria that could be used, later if, there's a decrease or something, but it doesn't really do much for our monogastrics. It leads into the large intestine, which is um, what leads into our colon, basically. And our colon, its major function is to absorb as much water and um, like some of our some electrolytes and such. There's no villi or microvilli, so it's not doing any major absorption of food. That's done now. It's just we're just kind of focusing on what's undigestible. So like with our monogastrics, it would be like fibrous type stuff. Um, it's also it's kind of like for storage of the feces until it's ready to get into the rectum, which is our next part. Um, it's It has an internal and external sphincter, just like our urinary bladder did. And just like the urinary bladder, the internal sphincter is smooth muscle. We have no control once feces have moved into the rectum and it's created that pressure, that feeling. It will relax, and that's what tells the animal, hey, you gotta poop. But that external sphincter, just like with the urinary bladder, can be learned to be controlled. So if it's not an appropriate time to go poop, then the animal can hold it. Um, but if it is an appropriate time to poop, the animal will assume its position, whatever that position for that animal is. Um, and it will allow the external sphincter to relax, and then the actual diaphragm and abdominal muscles will contract to help push out the fecal matter and make sure it's evacuated. Um, so yeah, I think that was the last little bit. Is there anything else that I missed? Or I should probably say, because it's talking about secretions, it's important for the um, the epithelium or the colonocytes of the colon to still be producing that mucus, because the colon is absorbing all of that water. You don't want, if the feces are too dry, then you're not going to be able to evacuate them as well or as easily. So yeah, that's important to mention. And obviously not obviously, but the colon, it should be known that on the right side is the ascending colon, then we have the transverse colon that goes from right to left, and then on our left we have our descending colon, and that goes eventually to our rectum, and the colon is just found on the more caudal portion of the animal in the abdominal cavity. Alright, so yeah, okay, I have finished the monogastric animals. Next video I will talk more about specifics with the ruminants and hindgut fermenters and avian. And then I could have done the, walk through what's happening with the food in each step, but I want to kind of review that a little bit better and then just do it all in one sitting and then just say specifically maybe the differences of what's happening with the food as I go along with the different systems. And then just there's a few things that we haven't touched yet, so that will be saved for later too. So I hope that the two parts will work well. It might accidentally be a three-part because I accidentally ended my video when I was going over the vocab. So if I can't figure out how to fix it together, it might be three parts. So, but anyways, I will see you in part